We have a couple of viewers who've asked about the role of billionaires and who are concerned that billionaires essentially are conspiring to overturn democratic norms, that they would benefit if we end up with essentially militarized law enforcement and the Constitution is gutted. Obviously, the billionaires have made their money under the old rules, so I don't quite understand why they would want to do that in the view of these viewers, but can you speak to their concerns?
Yeah, and I think I understand where that concern comes from because I think you're right, Larry. In general, you would think that the business community would realize that, for instance, destruction of meaningful courts isn't good for business. Randomly assigned tariffs, not good for business. I had asked somebody who's a Russia person if anybody had ever done a comparison of the 100 biggest Russian companies the year before Putin and the 100 biggest companies 5 years into Putin. How many of those earlier ones were no longer existing, and how many of them had their CEOs been thrown out of a window? Um, but I think what the reason that question's being asked is it does seem that we have a different kind of billionaire at the moment, largely out of, no offense to California, but the northern part of your state, um, in the tech industry, who are, I think, less predictable. Many of them, Peter Thiel, I'm talking about, or obviously Musk, have a sort of uh, almost cinematic view of a future world in which would look more like science fiction, but where they would, I guess, be our overlords. Um, so I think that's why people are concerned. I actually don't know any of those people. I just read what I read in the papers. I don't know if they take any of that seriously. I mean, does Elon Musk really want to go and lead humanity to a planet on which will save Earth? Or does he just want to have more money? I don't know. But I can
Well,
understand where that question comes from.
but of course, that's, a tiny percentage of billionaires. They're the most high profile because they say outrageous things and get
Yeah.
a lot of attention. So, I mean, I wonder, is that representative? Not surprisingly, Musk and Trump, of course, had their falling out after
Yeah.
working together, as Trump has with everybody who works with him. So, to to what extent do you feel like the uber rich, for a lack of a better term, who have gained tax advantages under the current administration, really are looking to somehow see an overthrow of historic norms to benefit them? Do you think that is a realistic concern?
I'm, I don't think so. I think you know everybody wants their taxes lower. Everybody wants to be able to sell more and at a higher price. That's how business works. I think most American businessmen, even at the top levels, with the exception of the people we were talking about, understand that their wealth comes from a structured system that encourages free speech, encourages development, adjudicates disputes fairly, is not completely not corrupt, but is generally not corrupt. Um, Now, do they think under the pressure they're under that they need to cozy up to this president for fear of damage? Yeah, I think that's probably right. In fact, there's been a couple of stories written recently. We wrote one of them, but I've seen a number, which is sort of assessing. The New Yorker had a great piece on it. Why are American business not pushing back? And I think a lot of it's, I'm going back to the indicators we talked about. This is what dictators do. Um, yeah, if you ran a steel company, you may want to say, no, you can't have a golden share of our company and have control of our board of directors. But if you do that, you may not be selling steel to the United States Navy anymore. There's a whole bunch of things that the president and his people have figured out they can do to threaten people who push back.
It's interesting though. We saw actually the opposite of that, and I'm sorry, I can't. You might remember the name of the CEO in San Francisco who, when President Trump said that he was going to send troops to San Francisco, said, "That's great. The troops should come in. We need that. It's not safe in San Francisco. We can't do business." And he was so, that business leader was so criticized, that he totally retracted, said was wrong. So it's funny. There was a case where within San Francisco's community, they actually got him to flip back and retract what he had said. Most of what we have seen is the Trump administration pressuring business leaders to, as you say, either censor themselves or be supportive.
If I learned one thing from working for Dianne Feinstein for so many years is never underestimate Californians' ability to push back on Washington. Don't mess with San Francisco unless you really have to. But I'm glad you raised that because I've been pretty bleak this whole conversation. So let me cast at least a ray here of some sunlight. I think there's an amazing amount of American resilience. I think the idea that San Francisco residents would tell a powerful, wealthy person that he was wrong and say it loud enough to make him back down. The fact that 7, 8, 9 million people showed up in the streets 2 weeks ago for demonstrations all across the country. The fact that all but 2 of the academic institutions targeted for the first sort of, you have to sign this agreement with us. There were 9 of them. All but 2 of them said no. I have a certain amount of optimism. Americans are tougher than I think Donald Trump thinks they are. I think Americans are smarter than Donald Trump thinks they are. And I think our institutions are stronger than he thinks they are. Look how our federal district judges have been pushing back, despite having a Supreme Court that probably is not going to back them up. Look how in many cities, it's not just San Francisco. Look what's happening in Chicago, in New York. New York just elected a person on the anti-Trump ballot practically. So I have a certain amount of optimism that there's been a miscalculation. Not all the dictators that we've seen overseas triumph.
Just a reminder, next week, I'll be back talking with Slate senior writer Mark Joseph Stern about the federal courts and the contentious political environment in which they're being asked to decide the limits of executive, congressional, and judicial authority. I know it's going to be a very intense conversation, a lot to talk about. Almost certainly we'll have something right out of the headlines to talk about with Mark. That's next Wednesday, our usual time, 5 o'clock Pacific. We look forward to seeing you then. Until then, have a great coming days.